What's up and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you're new here, then hello! My name is Erica and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, I am chatting to author Rosie Hewlett, who recently released her gorgeous retelling titled Medea. Well, here in the UK, it's titled Medea because if you're in North America, it has actually been published under the name The Witch of Colchis. Now, that's obviously important to mention because there is a book already titled Medea in North America. So if you are one of my viewers from across the pond, just be aware of that when you go into Barnes and Nobles. It looks a little bit different. The photo is up on the screen of the cover that you can be expecting. Now, today, Rosie and I are going to be talking about her inspirations, where she found all of her information, why she wanted to rewrite Medea, and all of that kind of stuff, which I'm so excited to be getting into. But it's important that I do let all of the viewers know that we will not be spoiling the book in the first half of the video. So the way we're going to be structuring this is in two separate halves. We will start with a non-spoiler section. So if you have not read Medea, if you've not read The Witch of Colchis, because it did just come out in North America, you are completely safe to watch the video up until I come back on camera, because I will address you guys about halfway through the video and I'll let you guys know when we're moving into the spoiler section. In the non-spoiler section, we're not even going to be talking about the end of the Greek myth. I really do not want to spoil this because Rosie does such an amazing job of retelling this and really building that tension and really taking you on that journey with the character. So if you have not read the book and if you're not familiar with the myth at all, then please don't be worried. I will warn you when you can exit the video and when it is unsafe to keep watching. So please do not worry about that. However, that was an incredibly long intro just that I could warn everybody about how this video will be structured, because Rosie, it is about time that we turn to you. And since we've already discussed your classics background when I actually interviewed you, oh my God, years ago now, for your first indie published book, Medusa, we were such babies. You were literally like one of my first interviews. That's so crazy. But because we've spoken about your classics background and your degree and all of that in that video, we'll kind of skip over that in this video. And why don't we just jump to the character of Medea? What is it about the Greek mythology of Medea that made you think she would make a perfect protagonist for a retelling in her own right in the modern world?
I mean, I just think Medea is the most interesting character from ancient Greece. When I studied myth, she was always a character that stood out to me as being so captivating, and she's slightly scary but fascinating, and you feel sorry for her, but you are also kind of terrified of her and what she's going to do. And she's so nuanced, and the way Euripides especially writes her and the complexities within her character and the things she talks about in terms of, women's rights and all of that. When I first studied his play, I just found that so fascinating. And then the more you dig into Medea, the more you realize all this stuff that she does across the course of her myth, all these things she's achieves. And she's just, I mean, a lot of the female characters in antiquity are really interesting, but they're often can be fairly passive or can be restricted to the home environment. Whereas with Medea, the scope of her myth is so epic. She is like an epic hero in a way of what she goes through. So I just thought she's the perfect protagonist because she's got this big epic journey. She's very complex. She's quite, morally grey, which I think is the best characters always are. And yeah, I just think she's so captivating. And as a writer, I don't know, I think she's every author's dream to write about.
So you mentioned there Euripides and how you digged a little bit deeper beyond Euripides into the text. So just for like the non-nerds who are coming to this, who are like, well, where is she in the ancient world? Like, what are you using to influence your writing and to influence your storytelling?
Yeah, so the main two source materials I used was Euripides, Medea, and Apollonius of Rhodes' Argonautica. So the Argonautica tells the early on part of Medea's story when she first meets Jason and their initial meeting, getting the golden fleece, and then escaping Colchis is what he covers. And then there's other myths that kind of adopted throughout, like we have Ovid, who tells a little bit about when they get to Iolcus and with the king there. And then we have later on Euripides, who tells the story of when they're in Corinth and everything goes a bit bad. So what's interesting is there's with Medea's myth, it's all a bit fragmented with different authors telling different points of it. So that's also what I really wanted to do is tell the whole scope of the myth from the very beginning to that, climactic ending, which a lot of people know, so that we can see Medea's character arc, because I think the Medea in Apollonius is quite very different to the Medea we see in Euripides. And I've always thought it's so interesting to see how does she get to that point and how does she become that Medea that is, the most famous version of herself. So that's really what I wanted to do, is follow that arc, or I suppose downward spiral that she goes on.
And what was your, okay, not necessarily like connection to Medea, because again, as you've said, like she's a terrifying character, and I don't think that anybody can relate to Medea in that kind of way. But I mean, as an author, like, what was, I guess, your touch point with her that helped you kind of get into writing this book?
I think I do actually think she's very relatable, which might be worrying. But I think, I mean, maybe later on less so, but I really think when she's early on, when she's, young and very sheltered, and living her life as a princess in Colchis. And then, Jason comes along and he's very handsome, he's very suave, and he sweeps her off her feet. And I think that's so relatable in terms of when we've all been teenagers, and you meet a guy and you think he's the best person in the world, and you get swept up in that, and that first love, and looking past so many of the red flags because you just think he's the one. And we've all had those times when people are telling you he's an absolute jerk, and you're like, no, he's not, he's just misunderstood. And also, sadly, the gaslighting that goes on throughout the course of Medea's story with Jason, that is also really relatable. And I think that element of the emotionally abusive relationships, I think sadly a lot of people today can relate to, and can really understand, can see what's going on before Medea can as well, which I think is, when I was writing it, you really want to kind of scream and tell her, don't do it, but you've just got to go through the motions with her. So I think I really connected with her on that sense. And her naivety, I think, is really fascinating to me, because she's such a powerful character, but she's also very naive, because she's a young girl and she's been, sheltered and kept in the palace. She's not seen any of the world. And I think that interplay of power and naivety, and how they kind of link together, and how Jason, or someone like Jason, comes along and, sort of weaponizes one to utilize the other. I just think it's really interesting to write about. And I loved exploring that.
Yeah, sticking with the naivety element, and we'll get back to Jason, because obviously thoughts. But with Medea being so young, I loved how you opened the book with kind of exploring her and Circe when she's very, very young. Why for you is it important to kind of ground the story in that relationship between aunt and niece?
I think, well, firstly, in general, relationships between women in the ancient myths is so important to me. And I think, I mean, I love the ancient myths, I always have, but something that I think they fall down on is the relationships between women. If it's not strictly like mother-daughter, I don't think we really see much of it, especially not female friendships, because I think, back then these myths were written by men for men. And I think they just weren't really interested in women being friends and that kind of stuff. It was sort of a bit sidelined. So something that was really important to me, which I've tried to focus on throughout the book, is the relationship between Medea and the women in her life, because I think that's really, really interesting. And then Circe is definitely like a pivotal figure, because she is her aunt, and she's very much like the teacher mother figure. And I just think that dynamic is really interesting, and something I'd not really seen before, is as Circe as her teacher, because these are two, witches, two sorceresses, and they're quite rare in the ancient world. We don't see a lot of them. And I really thought it was interesting just to see how these two women interacted, and how Circe kind of passed on her wisdom to Medea, because they are very similar in a lot of ways, but they're also very different in a lot of ways. And I think seeing that exploration of their characters, and the way they kind of mirror each other, and maybe sometimes they mirror each other too much, but then they also take different paths with their stories. I just think all of that is just so interesting. And I just loved, I mean, I loved writing Circe, because I think she's such a fascinating character as well. And I say this a lot, but it is like fan fiction for me, just getting to write all my favorite characters and getting to see how they'd interact, and like, oh, what would they act like, and like how would they react to each other. That stuff is like what I live for when I write these books.
A friendship that I loved reading in your book, and I don't know if it was like necessarily a surprise, but I think it was a surprise that these women got on so well, because you managed to like find the things that they would connect on was Atalanta and Medea. Like I really loved seeing them talk and just kind of having each other to bounce things off of and seeing how their stories sort of wove together. So can you talk a little bit about that? Just because, you know, with Circe, people know that name, and Atalanta now, because of Jenny's incredible book, people know who that is as well. Obviously, she's not in every single version of the Argo and going off. She's not in Apollonius, but I loved the way that you grounded her with Medea. So can you just kind of talk to us a little bit about exploring that friendship?
Yes, yeah. So you're right in that Atalanta isn't in Apollonius, but I was like, I'm putting her in because she's awesome. And you
Well,
can't
there's a
not.
note of her as well. Like she does supposedly go down to the beach, and then they say
Yeah,
go away.
she's there
So
and just doesn't go on the adventure, but I think she did. But yeah, no, I mean, again, exploring female friendships and female relationships, really important and something I really wanted to bring forward in the book. So exploring her relationship with Atalanta. I mean, interestingly enough, actually, I don't think I've really spoken about this before, but I initially when I started writing the book, I was considering doing it as a dual narrative between Atalanta and Medea, and like alternating chapters because they're both such interesting women. But then as soon as I started, I was like, there's way too much material for both of them because they are, I mean, in their own right, they have both such epic stories and they're both quite unique in that aspect. And I just knew I wouldn't be able to do both of them justice if I tried to wedge them both together. So I decided I kind of resonated more with Medea and her character voice. So I decided to stick with Medea, but then I obviously always wanted to make Atalanta quite a key character. Um, and yeah, and I mean, I love the way they play off each other because they're both such powerful women, but they're powerful in really different ways. And they're both at different points of their journeys, I think. Whereas Medea is very early on in her kind of acceptance of herself and her power, and she's still a bit unsure of it, and she's had the world kind of make her think it's a bad thing. Atalanta is further down her journey, and she's, you know, accepting of her strength and her power, and she's proud of it, and she's proud of who she is, and she's not going to take, you know, any nonsense from anyone. And I think seeing Atalanta kind of she recognizes elements of herself in Medea, I think, and what it is to be a powerful woman in a world that's it's not designed for powerful women. And I think that's what's kind of quite heartbreaking about their relationship as well, as Atalanta is really trying to, you know, guide Medea in the right path so she can follow in her footsteps. But it obviously doesn't always go to plan.
as it never does in Greek myths, or the Greek myth nerds who are like reading this book are going, "Oh God, this is just getting worse and worse." But obviously written so beautifully. And even when we meet Jason, he's obviously a character that all of the nerds who are reading it go, "He is nothing but trouble." And this is like the worst thing you could do is to have your head swayed by this man. But I loved how we fell with Jason as Medea fell with Jason. I thought that was such a strong point in your writing. And the way you wrote him is almost like, oh, I don't want to say this, but like this romantic hero when he shows up. You know, he's very quintessential in the way that you approached him, in the way, even the way he looks, like how tall he is, the way he walks, the way he speaks, which we've discussed this many times, where he says, "Who did this to you?" And he gives us all of these wonderful lines where you're like, I get it. I get why she is swayed. How difficult was that for you to write as a classicist and as somebody knowing where this story is going, to kind of write in all these things where you're like, oh, these are things that I love in a romance book. And we're also going to tear him down in about 5 pages.
It was actually, I mean, it was actually quite hard to write Jason in a likable way. I mean, I did love writing the romance bits because I am a romance girly. That is why I put in the whole like, who did this to you scene, because I love that stuff. And I think, yeah, you want to lull the readers who don't know the story into that full sense of security. But funnily enough, my agent, one of her first pieces of feedback really early on was like, you need to make Jason more likable because it's kind of obvious you hate him from the start. She's like, I can feel it like kind of seeping through the words that you secretly hate him. So that was something we worked on, was trying to like hold back on my I suppose the author voice hating Jason and really trying to lean into, because like you say, we need the reader to fall for Jason like Medea does. Otherwise you kind of will just get, you kind of be like, what does she see in him? And you need to, everything Medea does, you need to kind of believe believe why she would do that and why she would be so head over heels for this guy. And so you need to fall for him with her for that to happen. But yeah, it was clearly wasn't easy because I had to kind of go through that and really kind of make him seem more likable. But it was also fun to write. I think the kind of intimate scenes, the scene when Medea kind of sneaks into his room at night and like helps him with the spell for the trials, that was one of the scenes really early on I could just see so clearly in my head. I think as an author, there's certain scenes you can just see it, and that kind of sets the book in motion for you. And that was one of those scenes. I thought always in the Argonautica, I thought that scene was really interesting, but then I really wanted to like push it further because I mean I just thought it so interesting that she's meeting him secretly in the middle of the night, and like that sexual tension and the romance and the danger and all of that is just, to me, it's just, as an author, you just eat that stuff up. So yeah, I liked writing it, but I also was difficult to make Jason likable.
So then in addition to that, 'cause that's really interesting, because I'm not a writer, I don't know how the actual writing process works. Like, I'm just a reader. So was there anything from the Argonautica, aside from that, obviously, that really stood out to you that you were like, okay, that's a non-negotiable, that scene has to be in the book in a non-spoiler sense, obviously?
Yes, in a non-spoiler sense. Well, so there is actually one line in the Argonautica that really shaped my book for me, which is when, I mean, I don't think it's entirely spoilery, but it is something that happens later on, is when Medea is fighting the giant Talos, and she summons demons from the underworld, as you do. There's a line in one of the translations of the Argonautica that says, when she's summoning these demons, it says she shaped her soul to mischief. And I was reading that as I was already writing my version, but that whole idea of like she shaped her soul to summon the demons from the underworld, that just sparked in my head like, well, what if she literally is, you know, kind of shaping her soul as she summons these demons, and what would that do to her, and how would that kind of have knock-on effects? And that opened up the whole door for the darker magic, which is something that's explored throughout the book as the dark magic and how a witch accesses that and what it can do and the kind of toll it takes. So that's not that line from the Argonautica is what really inspired me in that whole kind of tangent that I go on in the book. But I mean, in terms of other scenes in Apollonius, there's quite a lot in there that I pulled from. I think but there's also areas that I really wanted to differ on as well. So I think like I didn't want Medea to just fall in love with Jason because she's, you know, struck by Eros's burning arrow of love, and it's, you know, the meddlesome gods who make her fall in love with Jason, because that just takes away all of her agency. Though I did want it to be a love story because I think that's really interesting. I wanted Medea to want to help Jason for herself because she wants to leave Colchis. And then that obviously opened up more doors of like, well, why does Medea want to leave Colchis, and what's her life like on Colchis? And that's, I suppose, as an author, when you start kind of unpicking it, and you can really get to like the core of the story. But yeah, I feel like I went on a tangent there.
Not at all. Not at all. The more talking, the better, because I find it so interesting to like get into people's heads. Like for me, like untangling all of that is so fascinating, because especially like when I read Greek myth retellings, the thing I love is seeing how much you guys pull from and what things inspire your stories. Because as you said there, it's not only Apollonius and it's not only Euripides, it's not only Ovid. You have like these beautiful little nods to these teeny tiny myths. Like you have a little nod to Scylla on page 76, who's not the scary monster, but is the woman who hands over a kingdom for love, that we do see in Ovid. But I meant the Ovid version of Medea earlier. So, you know, all of those like beautiful little nods that do litter the pages and that help you kind of tell the story and push the story in the direction that you want it to go. So I was wondering, what little nod were you the proudest of putting in that you were like, yes, I managed to get that in there?
I mean, I think the Scylla nod is really nice because I feel like her myth parallels Medea quite nicely in the terms of like a woman sort of ruining herself or betraying her family to help a man she believes she loves, and then, you know, it kind of turning around and not ending up so well for her. So I thought that mirroring of that myth is really nice, and then having it in it quite early on is almost like that foreshadowing. In terms of little Easter eggs, I mean, I like that throughout the book there are actually nods to, like, there's there's dialogue kind of taken from the source material. Like I think when Medea first goes to Jason in the middle of the night and meets with him secretly, I think one of the first lines he says to her is like, "Are you afraid to be alone with me?" And that's what he says to her in the Apollonius Argonautica. And when he looks at her in a certain way, and she describes his eyes as being like the dog star Sirius, and that's again taken from Apollonius. Later on, when things are going a bit bad, there's a line I think she says about her hatred, I think is or her fury is a cup that she would like pour and pour from, and that's again taken from Euripides' Medea, translation of that. So it's like I like bringing in actual like bits of the texts, and obviously not like plagiarizing it, like turning it in my own way, but like I love having those nods to the imagery and the dialogue and the stories kind of just tied throughout. Because for me, as a classicist, I suppose it's just I love the idea of retelling these stories and keeping these stories alive, and they all kind of weave together and they have those connecting threads. So keeping pieces of them in my version, I love that, and I think it kind of just adds to the whole experience of it.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that not only you do, but so many other writers in this space do. Because also what I find on my channel, because when I work through those, so I've done Apollonius of Rhodes for the people that want to read it, if they, want to go through it chapter by chapter. And there are so many times where people would be like, oh, that was just like what Madeline Miller wrote in Circe, or like, I didn't realize that was pulled exactly. So actually, what you guys are doing in such a beautiful way is bridging that gap for the language as well, where you're making it more modern, of course, but still you're adding in those beautiful ancient nods where it's like people are then going and they're not being as scared to then read that version. And I love
Yes.
that connection that you guys are doing. And it's so poignant and it's so specific. I think it's just done so beautifully well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I love that stuff.
So then to sort of come to the end of our non-spoiler section, because we'll continue talking in the spoiler section, because I have way more questions. But for the people who are going to exit this video because they don't want anything spoiled, they've met, Jason and Medea. They kind of get a feel of what you've done with the story. What do you hope that when they go and buy the book that they end up reading, what do you hope that they're going to take from it? Like what's sort of like a one, I guess, line or one sort of message that you hope people walk away from your book having?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I hope that reading the book, it's going to be an epic adventure for them in the world of Greek myth, but then it's also at its very core, it is the story of this incredible woman, and I hope they learn more about, know more about Medea and can kind of decide for themselves if she really is deserving of the title of villain, when they see, the whole scope of her complex story and her complex character. And yeah, there's just going to be a lot of female rage, and a lot of, I mean, there's in my head, it's a story that has everything. So it's got, revenge, betrayal, a love story, heartbreak. There's a dragon. There's war. There's a big epic adventure. I think it's has everything you could want, and at the core, there's a really fascinating, complex woman. So I hope people just really enjoy it and feel connected to the story and to Medea.
And I think also a key about, Medea in particular, because I think we see a lot of people online being like, oh, well, you're just like making up stories for these women because you want to see women in Greek myth. Like there's always that mentality of people coming in being like, no, it's just Achilles and it's Jason and Medea's like a side character, whatever. And I think what you've done so beautifully is pull forward Medea as this incredible, as you keep saying, complex character in her own right that the ancients would have loved seeing in her own right. Because obviously Euripides couldn't have called a play Medea with confidence and get people through the door in order to watch that play. So it shows that they were so fascinated by her. And all you've done is pull forward this incredible woman from the source material that's there.
Yeah, and all the stuff that she does, like I'd say she's the most powerful character, like mortal character in Greek myth, against any other hero. But everything that she achieves, everything she does, she's so badass and so powerful. So I think it's and it's all there. I haven't added and I haven't made up any of the stuff that she does. It's all part of her myth from the ancient world, which is just fascinating.
So now that we have tied that up, Rosie, and this half of the conversation, We are going to move into spoilers, but I should remind all of the viewers at home that now is your chance to dip out so that we don't spoil anything for you, because I would absolutely hate to do that. And even if you are just a Greek myth lover who wanted to kind of see if they should read this book to see where Rosie was going, I would also recommend that you guys do not listen to the spoiler section, because there are some things that Rosie has changed that we are going to be diving into from the Greek myth that I absolutely adored. I think are done really, really well, but I don't want to spoil it, because as somebody who is also obviously in the know about the Greek myth, these are elements that I was shocked by, that had my heart stammering in the best of ways, and I want you guys to have the exact same reaction. So thank you to everybody who has tuned in this far. Do not forget, as I said at the start of the video, you can find all of the links to not only Medea and the Witch of Colchis in the description below, but also Rosie's first book, Medusa. And you can find Rosie's social media links down there as well. So please do not be shy before exiting the video. Maybe pause it and then go down to the description below to check out all of the links down there. Because although it has been lovely to have you, we are going to move into some spoiler questions, Rosie. And I have quite a few to unpack with you. So the first one that I really wanted to just go in for, because it's really the first thing that you change, or that you add, really, shall we say, to the Greek myth, is the element of Medea making the dragon and like creating the dragon with her own magic that guards the golden fleece. And this was something that I thought was so clever, this whole element of kind of Medea being this incredibly powerful witch and sorceress that Aeetes kind of uses the rumors about the magic to kind of promote himself. And it really starts with this dragon. So talk to me about the decision to make the dragon a creation by Medea.
Yeah, well, I think it actually goes back, this idea goes back earlier to when I was kind of deciding about the plot and how I wanted it all to go. And as I said earlier, I didn't want Medea to help Jason just because she's in love with him. I wanted her to help Jason to help herself and give her agency. But then that obviously opened the question up of, well, why is she so desperate to leave Colchis? Why does she hate where she comes from? So then that was really opening up a lot of doors of trying to understand Medea's character and her home life and her family life. And that led me to, you know, deciding, because it's important to mention that in the ancient source material, Colchis is believed to be a land of magic and a land of, you know, Aeetes, her father, is known as a sorcerer king, so it's believed that her family are magical, and it's a land of magic. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if, like Jason, who took credit for everything Medea did, what if Aeetes is also taking credit for everything Medea's done? And what if Colchis actually isn't a land of magic? It's just rumors that have spread from Medea's power. And what if Medea is the only one with power there? Because we don't really have any evidence of Aeetes actually doing anything powerful for himself. So I felt it was plausible within the world of myth for him actually not to have any power, and he's just hiding behind Medea's power. So then that idea of, okay, so what if Medea is the only one with magic, led me to think of all the elements that go on within Colchis with, you know, the trials and the golden fleece and the dragon that protects the golden fleece. What if that was all Medea? You know, she got the dragon to protect the fleece. She created the fire breathing bulls to, you know, be one of the trials. All of that element is just her power. So, and I think once I opened that door, it really helped me understand her character and her dynamic with her father, who obviously hates that his daughter is more powerful than him. And I loved writing that scene when she turns the guard into the dragon. I just think it shows, like you say, how much terrifying power Medea has at such a young age. And I don't think she fully comprehends it either, because, you know, she's turning a man into a dragon, and she's kind of doing it because she can. And I don't think she's really stopping to think, is this morally correct? And I think that whole idea, again, like we were talking before about the interplay between power and naivety, and I think she's almost too young yet to kind of understand those questions of morality and what she's doing. She's just doing it because she's got the power to do it, like turning her brother into a pig early on. So I think that's a really interesting display of Medea's power, but also a display of her mindset and how she probably shouldn't be wielding such power yet before she fully understands it, or not having Circe to kind of oversee and be like, maybe you shouldn't just turn people into animals.
But also, you know, something that you've mentioned is how Medea, in your version, you wanted to give her that agency of wanting to leave outside of Jason. And I love that a big drive of that was Cersei and her wanting to see Cersei again and her wanting to kind of explore that. So, you know, as you've been saying, like unpacking and unpicking the story, why for that? For that? Why does that for you ring true that Cersei would be a driving factor for her and wanting to go there first and foremost? Because that really, you know, in reading your book, do I have a page number? Yeah, page 82 is when we hear her say that, where she's like, where she's like, I really want to go and I really want to see my aunt and all this. And it kind of seems like the story after that is pushed because of that event rather than she's running off with Jason. She's kind of like, I now have no other choice because this whole thing with Cersei has now, you know, gone to shit, for lack of a better phrase. So talk to me about why that really rung true, that there was going to be that connection between aunt and niece and all of this power there that would drive her away from her home.
The thing with Medea is, I think, at the core of her character, the way I mean, I have to preface my version of Medea, and this is how I've written her. The core of her character, I believe, is she wants somewhere to belong. And because she's grown up in a household that has treated her, you know, so horribly and ostracized her and made her feel so other, I think she just really, really wants somewhere to belong and wants to be with someone who will love her for who she is. And when she's younger, Cersei is that person because she comes into her life and she fully accepts her magic and she celebrates her magic and encourages it and guides her. And that's why, you know, early on in the book we see that Medea is kind of, she sort of becomes obsessed with Cersei, as you would, because she's like the really cool aunt who comes in and is just, you know, her hero. Um and what happens later on is she thinks Cersei abandons her. So that's why Medea doesn't think Cersei wants her in her life anymore. So she sort of blocks her out a bit. And then when her father lets slip that it wasn't that Cersei abandoned her, it's just that Cersei was put in exile on Aiea, that's when Medea's kind of suddenly is like, Cersei didn't leave me. She still probably wants me to be in her life. So then she's really focused on wanting to find Cersei because, yeah, for me, Medea's character is all about wanting to find somewhere where she belongs. And even if that's kind of a subconscious to her, I mean, she wants to be free, but I do think the reason why she's not just, oh, I just want to be free and travel Greece. She's like, no, I want to go to Aiea and I want to be with Cersei, is because she wants to be with someone who loves her and who accepts her and somewhere she feels like she can belong. And that's, you know, what drives her. But then sadly, through the course of getting to Aiea, she suddenly shifts her mindset as, you know, Jason starts manipulating her and she starts thinking, maybe Jason is the person who accepts me for who I am and who, you know, understands me, and he's the person who sees me for all my rights and my wrongs. And she starts to think, well, maybe I belong with him. And then that's, you know, when her kind of trajectory shifts. But yeah, I think for the core driving, you know, arc of her character, it just felt very true to me that she needed to get to Cersei.
And I loved how it shifted because you can see all of the horrible ways that Jason is just saying things throughout the book that you're like, no, don't believe him. But it starts with a lot of agency in Medea's case. You know, obviously your version of Medea, which I loved. And one of those scenes is when Jason asks Aetes for her hand in marriage. And there is more agency surrounding this, which was really nice to read in your book. So why did you want to give her even agency in those scenes where it seems like, you know, obviously in the ancient world, it wouldn't have been like, hey, Medea, is this something that would interest you? Like,
it's tricky because Medea is, you know, you're conscious of the fact that throughout the story, Medea is being emotionally manipulated by Jason. But I think it's really important to me that a character can be a victim but still be very powerful and still be very active within their story. And I didn't want Medea just to be very passive and just sort of really like easily molded by Jason, just kind of like just going along with whatever he does and just being very I didn't want it to be very weak. And so I think it was important to me to, in all aspects, we can see Medea's agency, we can see her power, and that she's not afraid to speak up and she's not afraid to, you know, push the boundaries of what's expected from her as a woman. And, you know, she takes agency with, again, like wanting to take Phrixus as a husband early on so she can escape. And then later on, she's just taking agency wherever she can. And I think that's was just important to me for her character to show that even though she's subtly being emotionally manipulated by Jason, she's still a very powerful woman. And you could, both things can be true. Do you know? I mean, you can be a victim of an emotionally abusive relationship and still be a strong, powerful woman. That they are not exclusive things. And I wanted to show that through her character.
and a balance there that I thought was done so well. And I think the scene that does this so well is the famous scene from Antiquity, which is that Medea kills her brother, but you have Jason give her the murder weapon. And it's like, for me, that was such a beautifully subtle moment of like, Medea's still doing it. She's still the villain. Don't get me wrong. But who is really there that's kind of guiding her in the direction to use this? I want to say evilly, but evilly isn't a word. This is why I'm not a writer, but badly. So, what were some of those subtle ways that you really thought in Jason's actions that you were like, when you're reading the source material, that you were like, that could be more? Like, that's definitely something that Jason is going to monopolize on. He's definitely going to be able to, in your version, actively give Medea, yeah, I guess you can say that, actively give Medea, quote unquote, the murder weapons for all of these different scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I think with that moment between Jason and Medea when he hands her the weapon, I think a lot of Jason's actions is he's sort of building in plausible deniability. So he's like, he hands her the weapon and he says like aim for the throat, but he never actually says kill your brother. So that's why later on when he's like, whoa, 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 I didn't tell you to kill your brother. And it's kind of that whole like epitome of gaslighting, in that he's pushing her so far in a certain direction, but he's not actually specifically stating it. And like with killing the king of Iolcus later on, Peleus, he doesn't directly say like kill him, but he's like, oh, maybe you could use your magic and kind of fix it for me. And again, it's so he can like have that plausible deniability that's like, I didn't tell you to do it, you just did it. So I think that was important to kind of show how cunning Jason is in that aspect, and how he's so good at playing people to do what he wants without telling them to do what he wants. But also in the Argonautica, when they have that scene between her brother and Jason and Medea, that happens, it doesn't happen on the ship, it happens, they stop at an island to make sacrifices. And that Jason, he's part of all that. I think people seem to think it is just Medea who is kind of like, I'm just going to kill him. But they have that kind of discussion, and he is being a bit cunning, and Jason's kind of playing everyone a little bit, and there's a point where Medea thinks Jason's turned his back on her and she has a go at him, and he's like, no, wait, we can fix this. And so he is part of that plan to kill her brother. But I think everyone just kind of forgets and just thinks it's Medea just does it just because, I think there is a version of Medea who is just sort of a bit evil and just goes around doing quite bad things, which is obviously an interesting version of her, but I wanted to dig into more of the like complexities of why would a woman kill her brother, and like what would drive her to do that other than just because she's evil. So I think really pulling out Jason's kind of sneakiness and how he's kind of like guiding her hand a bit.
And I think what's interesting about these really key moments in Medea's myth is how differently they are tackled in the source material. And so knowing that they have been done, in some versions she doesn't kill the brother, in some versions she does, in most versions she doesn't kill the kids, in Euripides she does, all of these things that are done so differently because she is such a scary character that actually all of them are plausible. And ancient authors themselves like to play with, well, who's influencing who's doing this? Are we placing her as the evil person, or are we placing her as the person who's being manipulated by Jason? And it's so fun to look at all of those in the source material and then to see how you do it as well. Like the scene in your book, Rosie, where she kills her kids. I know the myth. I know it. And yet my heart was pounding so hard in my chest. And I was like, Jason, don't go in that room. Jason, don't do it. Don't do it. And still he's like, show me the kids, show me the kids. Talk to me about that scene, because that was so perfectly crafted. Was that one that you saw, as you were saying earlier, when you go to the source material and you're like, boom, that was already in my head? Or was it one that as you were writing, you were like, oh, it's definitely going to be done in this way? And it kind of, I guess, was shaped by the version of Medea and the version of Jason that you were writing?
It was, definitely the latter. I think when I write my books, I don't always know how they're going to end, because I think that's a luxury to have with Greek myth retellings, is that I have the options of the endings that I know from the source materials, but I don't quite know yet what my version of Medea will do and what one will ring true for her. I think I was always leaning towards her, killing her kids, because something that was really important to me throughout writing this was not to sanitize Medea's character at all. I didn't want to write this and just be like, oh no, she was actually innocent and she didn't do anything wrong and it was all Jason. Like, she does do bad things. She does make bad decisions. And I wouldn't say she's a good character. I wouldn't necessarily say she's the villain, but I also wouldn't say, she's a really, really complex character in that gray area, like a very gray area. But yeah, so it's really important to me to not sanitize her or sugarcoat her character. So I did always think I would, go towards Euripides ending. But I didn't know how I was going to directly do that. And I love Euripides Medea. Do not get me wrong. I've seen it performed live multiple times. I think it's amazing. But there is an element for me of when she kills the kids just to spite Jason, or just as like an act of revenge. There's an element to me that writing that, I think it felt a little bit hollow for my Medea. Just, I think when we've gone on this journey with her, just doing it for revenge didn't feel true for her character. So that's why I thought it was actually more heartbreaking and more haunting and felt to me more powerful that Medea doesn't actually kill the kids for Jason. She does it for herself and for them, because she believes, because her whole life she's been told that she's a monster, she's awful, she's terrible, she's going to do all these awful things. And then she does end up doing awful things because of the way her, the route her life takes her on. And so then she feels like she's protecting her kids from becoming like her. So she thinks she's doing the right thing and she thinks she's being a good mother by killing them, which is obviously not the right thing to do, but she's so in that dark place in her mind. And for me, I just thought that was more powerful. So when she does actually, when Jason does see the bodies, he thinks she's done it as revenge, but she's like, oh, you can't possibly understand because you're such a selfish person. You could never understand this kind of selflessness. And that kind of like, the way they both see that scene differently, I think is really interesting, and how they kind of both view it. And that scene was obviously very harrowing to write. But it was also, again, as an author, those scenes with that much emotion and that much like to dig into is like really, it's so enjoyable is the wrong word, but it's like, I love writing those scenes because there's just so much in it and so much emotion within it.
No, 100%. And I think as well, like, it shows the powers of these myths just as like a genre, because even though, again, like, I know the story, I know, okay, well, there's one or two ways this is going to go, and both are pretty bad. So I'm prepared from page one of where this is going. And yet still that scene had my heart racing the whole time. And it was done, as you said, like the way that the two characters see that scene as well, and the way that Medea's talking, and you're like, oh my God, like she really believes she's right. Like there's no part of her in your version that she goes, this was just because I wanted to, make Jason feel the ounce of pain that I feel, or anything like that. Like it really is. She is so delusional by that point, in a really sad way, though. Like you can really see how everything that we've read has impacted that moment, that you really are, and this sounds so bad, you can't hate her because you're like, God, I've watched this journey. I don't know if I would have, and this sounds really worrying, but like, obviously within the confinements of myth, I don't know if I would have reacted any differently if I was this incredibly powerful sorceress and had been through everything that you did.
Yeah. And I just think like the point that she's at in the myth, like she's not in a sound state of mind, and she's so isolated. She's got no one to talk to about it. There's no one there to help her. And again, it's like that self-fulfilling prophecy, I suppose, of everyone told her she was going to become this thing. And then she did end up becoming that thing, but that's because of everyone else and because of everyone telling her she was going to become a monster. And then she wants to protect her kids from that. And it's just, for me, it just all kind of, when I thought about the ending in that way, it just all really kind of married up for me, as in like this felt to me like a really true ending for my version of Medea. And it is, but yeah, very, very sad.
Now, of course, again, we know the myth and we know how popular it was in the ancient world, but since you're writing for a modern audience, was there ever a moment as you're writing this that you're like, maybe the modern world isn't gonna go for this Medea? Maybe I should change her. Like, did you ever have that voice in your head that you had to silence in any kind of way, or did you always have faith in Medea because of how popular she was?
I think for me personally, I've always, I think that killing her kids element is such like a taboo, fascinating part of her character that I did want to explore it. And I was more worried about not worried, but like I thought more if I didn't explore that, then people who are fans of the myth might have been like, or you've sort of just like sugarcoated her character and got rid of like kind of the key part. I would have been a bit disappointed almost that she didn't kill her kids, which sounds awful, but you know what I mean. But yeah, so I always thought, for me personally, I think that's such an interesting part of her character that I did want to explore it. But I actually, there have been people who've said to me that like it's, well, I early on when I was querying this with agents, Medea with agents, that I did meet with an agent, and she did say like, I'd love to represent you, but I do think the ending is problematic. And she was kind of saying that killing her kids, she was worried it would, really put off readers. And she made an interesting point about how readers are a lot harder on female characters, and if female characters do the wrong thing, readers are a lot more judgmental and don't like them as much as male characters, which I think is just true for women in general and really speaks to the themes in Medea. And that was a really interesting point that she made. But I obviously didn't. I was like, that's interesting, but I still want to do it. And if anything, that makes me want to do it more. Because I don't want to just, I don't think it's fair that women have to be more palatable for readers. Like, I think women should be able to be complex and do the wrong thing. And I think for me personally, that's more interesting. And also interesting, there's other aspects of like my agency. I've got a different agent, obviously. That was just one I met with, but my agent now, my agency, as part of with any book, they pitch it for they pitch books for like movie and TV deals. That's just what they always do. But they were like, we think maybe Medea, they might have a problem with the whole kid killing bit, so we're not holding our breath for any kind of like TV and film deals. And I'm like, you know what, fair enough. Maybe it's a step too far for film.
That's just so interesting though, again, because like I think like my head's so in the sand with the ancient stuff and like knowing the reception of those stories that like it's so interesting. Like that's such a fascinating point that it's like women who are female characters are going to get judged. Women who are female characters, women who are female male main characters. What is wrong with me this afternoon? But you know what I mean? Like these women who are the heads of these books or these stories are going to get judged so much harsher. Because when you think about the fascinatingly like powerful women, you also did Medusa for your first indie book, which is so cute and we love it. But all of these women who are terrifyingly powerful and who choose to react in different ways. Like the idea that they would be judged so much harsher is obviously true, but it's so upsetting when these stories have existed for so long because they were so interesting and because people like to read into them. And it kind of helps you understand that middle period where people stop talking about them, that it's like, oh no, we've decided that men can do whatever they want in stories, they can go around, they can kill whoever it is, and we're going to call them a hero. But the woman who's struggling or the woman who has this incredible epic story, we're going to ignore her because we don't like that. We don't like the idea that women are at the forefront. It's so interesting because I guess it is so true.
Yeah,
and how do you argue against that?
And literally like Hercules, he kills his kids, but he's still a hero. Medea kills her kids and she's a villain. And they, again, like we were talking before, Medea is in many ways a Greek hero, and she goes on a big adventure, and a lot of Greek heroes take action because they feel like they've been wronged and they've been disrespected, and that's what Medea does in Euripides. And if she was a man, I think she'd be celebrated, but because she's a woman, her reception very much so has seen her as the villain. But yeah, there's characters like Heracles, who kills his kids, but he's fine, he's a hero. Got a Disney film, he's all right.
Even if you think about like Achilles, who he decides he's not going to fight and thus kills so many men because he won't get onto the battlefield. And he says that point. He's like, I hope they all die, so that way they realize how important I am. And people are like, he's amazing. He's so great. We love Achilles. And I do love Achilles, but he says some wackadoodle stuff in the Iliad. And you're like, bro, what? Like, and yet Medea, no, we're going to push it to the side.
Yeah, and again, Achilles does that because he feels like he's been disrespected and he's been wronged. And but with him, it's fine. But then with Medea, when she feels like she's been wronged by Jason, it's suddenly like, but you're a woman, you're not allowed to, take revenge. That's not allowed. So yeah, it's very double standards, which is interesting that it still perpetuates today with what that agent was saying about women being treated harsher in books.
And actually, as we were just talking there, a question that came to my head was one that in Issa's group chat in her like book club. So for you guys who aren't aware, basically Rosie and I were part of this really wonderful Spanish book club that was the first English read that they had done. So it was super cute. And we like got on a group call, and so many people from MoAn's audience also came. And one person who asked a question was the lovely Christopher. So I am giving you credit for this question because it's not mine. But he asked a really good one where he wanted to know, because you wrote the book in first person, how if you had written the book in third person, it would have changed the interaction with Medea, do you think, as an author and also for the reader? So how do you think that voice really impacts your version of this story?
Yeah, a really, really interesting question. And I think when I sat down to write this book, I always heard Medea's voice in my head as, her telling the story in first person. So I think for me, it always felt like that was how I was supposed to write it, because that was how I could hear her voice in my head. And I do think first person allows you that kind of unfiltered access into someone's mindset, which third person also does as well. But I do think third person is a step removed from that. And you do, though third person does usually follow one perspective, you are a step removed, and you do see a sort of a wider view of the world in third person. Whereas in first person, you're very much, we are in Medea's head, so we're seeing the world through Medea's eyes. And I think that's so interesting for elements like, her falling in love with Jason and Jason's manipulation and the downward spiral of her mental health and her believing what she does to her kids is the right thing to do, and her turning against certain people. I think to be in Medea's mindset, to really understand her, why she's thinking that and how she gets to that point, I think for me personally, first person felt the most true to her character. I also really like the idea, one of my favorite things in the book actually is the final chapter, which is from her sister's point of view. So that's the only time in the book that we're not in Medea's mindset. And I think for me, I did that because I wanted it to be symbolic of, throughout the course of the book, we see Medea isolating herself more and more and more from everyone around her. And so by the end of the book, she's so isolated that even the reader's not allowed inside her headspace anymore. So even we are on the outside. So now we are, from Alciope's point of view, looking in. And I think that, again, that's something that you can only really achieve through first person, and really showing that like removal from being so close to Medea to being on the outside looking in. And I think that's makes the final chapter so much more powerful, in my opinion. And yeah, I just love first person as well. I think it's just how I naturally write, but third person is definitely something I want to like dabble in perhaps future books.
So then, as one of my final questions, these are still going to sound quite general, but I kind of want to give you the freedom to talk about any moment in the book. I did this with B and it worked well because for Tekka, she wanted to talk only about the ending when I mentioned this. So for you though, what was your favorite scene to write?
Ooh. It's hard because when I think back on, I wrote it so long ago now, it also feels like I'm trying to remember writing it. But there's so many good scenes in her myth. Again, like the scope of her myth is so cool. Like, again, we talked earlier about her turning, this is something I sort of added in, but her turning the guard into a dragon, that was really fun to write. In general, the magic and all of that, I love fantasy books, so bringing in the real fantasy elements of Greek myth was really exciting and fun. And there's the action that's in it as well when they have the fight on Colchis. But for me, the best scenes are always the really emotional scenes. And I really, really loved, one of the scenes I really, really loved is her and Cersei on Aiea when they're reunited, and they have that chat by, Cersei's fireplace, and they're sort of catching up and then talking about everything they've been through, and Cersei sort of starting to realize that Medea is going down quite a dark path. But then she also recognizes a lot of herself in Medea, because they've both been, Cersei's been recently wronged by a man who used her for power, and she can sort of see that happening again with Jason, and that relationship between them and that conversation where I think Cersei's trying to help her, but she doesn't necessarily go about it the right way, and then ends up sort of pushing Medea further away. That scene, I think, I really loved writing that between the two such powerful women. I also loved any scene with Atalanta, because she's just such a fun character to write. I just thought she just writes herself, really. She's one of those characters that's just so easy to bring to life. And then also I think all of the post 10-year jump, that whole part, I really liked writing when Medea is 10 years on, and she's sort of can see Jason for who he is. I liked writing that because you finally, the ball's been pulled off her eyes and she can see Jason for who he is, and being able to write that felt quite cathartic, because you can finally start calling him out rather than being on the kind of the naive younger Medea side when she's sort of being swayed by him. So that whole post 10-year jump was really enjoyable to write, and like a lot of like meaty emotion to get into, which is always the best.
And you've mentioned so many characters. We've talked about so many characters, but even in that answer, you know, mentioning Atalanta and Circe and all of these wonderful people that you brought to life, who was your favorite in the wider ensemble of characters that you were so happy to include in the book and you were like, yay, they get a few lines too?
I think it was Atalanta, and Circe. Like, I know I keep bringing it back to those two, but just I think having it's so unique having three really powerful women in Greek myth all interacting together. When you have Medea, Circe, and Atalanta, they are all really uniquely powerful women who have really interesting stories, where they have a lot of agency within their stories. And so having that interaction between all three of them, I think is so unique to Medea's myth, and something that we didn't see in the ancient world, because they didn't really. There's a little bit of, Medea and Circe crossing over, but not a lot. So it's be able to bring that out on the page, I loved that. And yeah, Atalanta is just such a fun character. She offers a little bit of comic relief, which I think the book really needed, because there's some dark stuff in the book. So so being able to have her add that little bit of levity was really nice.
Well, I loved also Phrixus. He was one of my favorite additions. I thought he was great.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, he's such like a kind of forgotten character, but he's very, I think he means well.
That's exactly the vibe that I got from him. I loved his addition. I loved his scenes. I thought, oh no, you just sit in the corner. Like, it's fine. Just sit there. We love having you here. But just like a little less, like very wholesome.
Yeah.
Actually, the core, I would say.
Too much for Phrixus. He's just I'm not sure about the magic.
So then, as a final question for everybody that's stuck around this long, obviously all of your links are in the description below, so everybody can find you with ease. But without getting too specific, what can we expect from you in the future? Are you still going to be writing myth retellings? Are you staying within the Greek myth world? Or can we see you in other sort of domains?
I am, for now, staying inside the Greek myth retelling world. So I'm currently editing book 3, which is another Greek myth retelling. It's not been announced yet, but I'm hoping soon I can announce it, because I'm desperate to talk about it. So I'm editing that one at the moment, which is really good fun. And I've got, a few ideas that I'm just starting out for my next myth retellings after that. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'd also like to sort of step into fantasy, because I love fantasy and all of that. But right now, I'm in the Greek myth retelling, which I love.
Oh, well, Rosie, it has been such a joy to talk to you, and I am so excited to continue watching your author journey. I mean, it's been such a privilege to watch you go from Medusa to the strengths of Medea, and I have no doubt that you will continue to give us some incredible work that we get to greedily enjoy. I'm just so thrilled and so excited by your success. So thank you so much. And of course, thank you to everybody at home who continues to watch and to support the channel. It means the world to me that you guys continue to engage with all of the videos and the content that I put out, not only here, but also on Instagram, on Twitter, etc., etc. You guys are truly the best. So as I said at the start of the video and in the middle of the video when I came back on, you guys can find all of the links to Rosie's socials as well as Rosie's books in the description below. Please do not be shy to go and check those out, and to follow her, obviously, for all of her next projects, announcements, and all of that incredibly exciting stuff. But thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. It has been a pleasure. It is always a joy. And I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.